Thus, the mildest criticism of religion is also the most radical and the most devastating one. Religion is man-made. Even the men who made it cannot agree on what their prophets or redeemers or gurus actually said or did. Still less can they hope to tell us the meaning of later discoveries and developments which were, when they began, either obstructed by their religions or denounced by them. And yet the believers still claim to know. Not just to know, but to know everything. Not just to know that God exists, and that he created and supervised the whole enterprise, but also to know what he demands of us, from our diet, to our observances, to our sexual morality. In other words, in a vast and complicated discussion, where we know more and more about less and less, yet can still hope for some enlightenment as we proceed, one faction, itself composed of mutually warring factions, has the sheer arrogance to tell us that we already have all the essential information we need. Such stupidity, combined with such pride, should be enough on its own to exclude belief from the debate. The person who is certain, and who claims divine warrant for his certainty, belongs now to the infancy of our species. It may be a long farewell, but it has begun, and, like all farewells, should not be protracted. I trust that if you met me you would not necessarily know that this was my view. I have probably sat up later and longer with religious friends than with any other kind. These friends often irritate me by saying that I am a seeker, which I am not, or not in the way they think. If I went back to Devon, where Mrs. Watts has her unvisited tomb, I would surely find myself sitting quietly at the back of some old Celtic or Saxon church. Philip Larkin's lovely poem, Church-Going, is the perfect capture of my own attitude. I once wrote a book about George Orwell, who might have been my hero if I had heroes, and was upset by his callousness about the burning of churches in Catalonia in 1936. Sophocles showed well before the rise of monotheism that Antigone spoke for humanity in her revulsion against desecration. I leave it to the faithful to burn each other's churches and mosques and synagogues, which they can always be relied upon to do. When I go to the mosque, I take off my shoes. When I go to the synagogue, I cover my head. I once even observed the etiquette of an ashram in India, though this was a trial to me. My parents did not try to impose any religion. I was probably fortunate in having a father who had not especially loved his strict Baptist Calvinist upbringing, and a mother who preferred assimilation, partly for my sake, to the Judaism of her forebears. I now know enough about all religions to know that I would always be an infidel at all times and in all places, but my particular atheism is a Protestant atheism. It is with the splendid liturgy of the King James Bible and the Cranmer Prayer Book, liturgy that the fatuous Church of England has cheaply discarded, that I first disagreed. When my father died and was buried in a chapel overlooking Portsmouth, the same chapel in which General Eisenhower had prayed for success the night before D-Day in 1944, I gave the address from the pulpit and selected as my text a verse from the Epistle of Saul of Tarsus, later to be claimed as St. Paul, to the Philippians, chapter 4, verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. I chose this because of its haunting and elusive character, which will be with me at the last hour, and for its essentially secular injunction, and because it shone out from the wasteland of rant and complaint, and nonsense and bullying which surrounds it. The argument with faith is the foundation and origin of all arguments, because it is the beginning, but not the end, of all arguments about philosophy, science, history, and human nature. It is also the beginning, but by no means the end, of all disputes about the good life and the just city. Religious faith is, precisely because we are still evolving creatures, ineradicable. It will never die out, or at least not until we get over our fear of death, and of the dark, and of the unknown, and of each other. For this reason, I would not prohibit it, even if I thought I could. Very generous of me, you may say. But will the religious grant me the same indulgence? I ask, because there is a very real and serious difference between me and my religious friends, and the real and serious friends are sufficiently honest to admit it. I would be quite content to go to their children's bar mitzvahs, to marvel at their Gothic cathedrals, to respect their belief that the Quran was dictated, though exclusively in Arabic, to an illiterate merchant, or to interest myself in Wicca and Hindu and Jain consolations. And as it happens, I will continue to do this without insisting on the polite reciprocal condition, which is that they in turn leave me alone. But this religion is ultimately incapable of doing. As I write these words, and as you read them, people of faith are in their different ways planning your and my destruction, and the destruction of all the hard-won human attainments that I have touched upon. Religion poisons everything.